Hey, everybody. Welcome to Coffee Time at the Water's Edge. I'm Rodney, and we have with us Dr. Stephen Roby and Pastor Adam Rastetter. Thank you, gentlemen.
Hey, everybody.
What up, what up?
So today we are going to be talking about music for the worship service.
La música.
Yes. We had a question from a member of the congregation, and it came up in a conversation through a community group, and even came to us as elders in the church to discuss, which I think was a great discussion. But we're going to continue on with that here in this episode. And before we get into that, what coffee are we drinking, Steve?
The good doctor himself, Martin Luther, Reformation Coffee Company.
All right.
This is a coffee from Guatemala. It is an organic Guatemalan coffee from the local region of Huehuetenango. I'm sure that's way off.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have somebody correct you.
H-U-E, Tenango. And I can read Spanish, but I don't know how to pronounce that. It's a medium roast with flavors of maple, milk, chocolate, fruit. It has a juicy acidity and is sweet and complex. Great for espressos and pour-overs.
All right.
Wow.
Pretty stoked.
Yeah.
Semper
really good.
Reformanda.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Always reforming. Here I stand. I cannot recant. Cheers, mates.
Cheers. I like it.
I like it.
I dig it. It is good. I like the acidity.
Yeah.
Because it's not overbearing.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it's Guatemalan too.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I'm actually pretty happy with that. I mean, normally, it's interesting because normally I've usually tasted the coffees before we even bring them on.
Real reaction right there.
So you're getting a unique,
Okay.
reaction
First
out of
time
me this time.
reaction.
First time reaction. I really like it. So thank you guys from Reformation Coffee Company for making good coffee, for roasting good coffee. Yes, coffee cup.
What's up?
Very nice.
Should have brought the Luther bobblehead out.
That's true. You do have one.
Yeah, quick disclaimer. I've been sick, so I have my voice. And just in case I start coughing, sneezing, I think I'm good. But
I'll make sure
I don't know
back
why.
up.
I just wanted to put that out there.
Back up.
I don't sound, I feel funny. Yeah. I'm definitely on the mend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. So today we are talking about music. And as this came up, this was the question came up because of a song that we did in a worship service that came from Hillsong. And the question, if you remember what the actual topic was, it had to do with a verse in the song, correct? Or
Yeah. I think the broader discussion was just these groups: Hillsong, Elevation Worship, Bethel Music, those groups. How do we feel about singing songs from those particular movements?
right?
And I know that came up in a community group, and the song that was brought up was "What a Beautiful Name," and so and there was a particular lyric in the song: "You didn't want heaven without us, so you sent Jesus down. You sent heaven down," I think is the lyric. And so with that lyric, there truly is a sense in which, of course, God desired us to be with him. He desires all to repent and come to the knowledge of the truth, to be in heaven. But there could be a way of thinking about that lyric to where it's more man-centered and a needy God. It doesn't say that, but if you change it that way, I think you could think of it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the bigger discussion is, what are the criteria for selecting songs in a church? And should a church sing songs when the songs directly benefit groups or other churches or movements that the church would not endorse? And so I think that's part of the larger conversation. And there's a lot of channels that have had this conversation before. So I think this is kind of cool because, one, I wasn't there for the elders conversation, so I'm kind of getting looped back in. I just came back from some travel with the military. But two, I think that, this podcast, one of the things that we've, tried to do is give an open window, if you will, into our ministry, and us three, particularly being elders at the church, how we process things, how decisions are made, kind of a back, sort of behind the curtain look at, things that are going on within the church, practical ministry issues. And so this is one of those things where, a question arose, and what informs our thinking about, constructing a worship gathering, and how would we, respond to a question like that?
Right. So speaking into that, exactly what do we do to figure out whether we should use a song or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that one thing, when I first heard the question that the new member brought up in the community group, I think it was, I love that there's discernment there, that people are looking at lyrics, they're thinking about those things and wanting to make sure that we are singing theologically true songs that are glorifying to God, worshipful, that everything that we sing is accurate. And as far as we try not to bring in too many new songs quickly. First of all, we want to introduce a song every so often. We want our songs to generally be, most people know the songs. We're going to be able to sing. The congregation's going to know the songs, and for the majority. So we do put out a song ahead of time and say, okay, here's a new song, and if people are able to listen to it, they'll get to know it, and we'll do it a couple of times in consecutive worship services so that people are familiar with the song and get to know it well. Songs are often suggested by different members of the worship team, sometimes people within the congregation as well. And when songs are suggested, they are looked at closely. With the lyrics are looked at under the microscope to make sure that this is a song that would be edifying to the church. It's God honoring in all of his ways. We love when a song elevates God's holiness, man's sinfulness, man's need for Christ. That we love when the gospel's present in the songs, Christ's death, resurrection being essential for our salvation. We love those things to be present in songs. We like our songs to be gospel-centered, robust in their theology. So we're examining a song to make sure that it is it's not going to mislead people. So that's really our process.
Okay.
I think criteria, though, you're looking at lyrics first, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is this doctrinally sound?
Yeah.
Second, you're looking at what are we preaching on that week?
Oh yeah.
Is there a theme that we're preaching on, and a song that brings that out, or scripture that we're going to read, or exposit? Or there songs that are tied to those scriptures? Those are two of the criteria. And I think the third is just overall singability, right? Is this a song that lends itself well to congregational singing,
right,
versus performance of an artist? Because there's a lot of stuff like you hear on the Christian radio, people are like, oh, let's sing that. I'm like, that doesn't really work well in a congregational setting. And so I think those probably are the three criteria. And I guess the question that we're kicking around now is, should we add more criteria? Should we look at the artists themselves, and who, what does this speak if we're singing songs by a particular group or a particular person? And then you get into, what are the second and third order issues of the song choices we make? I'm speaking military. I've been with military travel. We often talk about when leaders make decisions, you have to consider the second and third order effects of those decisions. And so I think that this question begs, answers to that. What is the second order effect of singing a song in which a name flashes? Oh, this song was by Hillsong or by Elevation. And those are the three that tend to come up a lot of Bethel music. Is the second order effect that someone in the congregation is going to see that and think, oh my, go home and Google that. I liked that song.
Yeah.
Let me go look them up, and then start following their ministry and be drawn into, a ministry or particular teachings that we would not endorse as a church. That's kind of the second, third order, as you think about what are the implications of this. And I'm not so sure that happens, I think, but it's certainly possible that it could. And I think that's why this is a topic that a lot of churches are wrestling with. I know people have been writing about this, having discussions about this. This is not something that we've, thoroughly discussed among our board. And so it was kind of cool for me, like not being at the discussion, to kind of hear what the elders were thinking about this stuff.
It's interesting that you bring that up about people listening to a song and seeing the name flash, because not here at Water's Edge Church, but at a previous church, I was guilty of doing that. Seeing a song, seeing who it was by, or looking up who it was by, and going straight to Apple Music or to iTunes and downloading everything from that band. Yeah, because you think if this church is promoting that, then it must be sound.
Yeah. So that would be second order. Third order would then be, does that mean they endorse the ministries of those churches?
Yeah.
Let me look up who the preacher is there, like Stephen Furtick or Bill Johnson or Brian Houston and Hillsong. And so that's like third order then. So it goes from music to the ministry and the teaching of the church.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes problematic. I think why churches wrestle with this and are really having some honest conversations about, do we want to actively sing songs that benefit these movements? And really the issue or problem with this is that, sorry, it's vibrating. My phone is on silent, but it is vibrating, and my Apple Watch is telling me, sorry, honey, that's my wife. The issue is that these churches are being built off of music, that this is like an evangelistic tool, that a lot of people support these ministries and they grow to a certain level of influence through their music. And I think that this is a worthy discussion for those reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's in people's minds. I mean, how much is there the interconnectedness of the worship song to that ministry? I'm not sure. In my mind, it has not been very prominent. You said you'd go look up different songs, and I think that is because there are songs, okay, we're picking and choosing. So, in a whole album, there may be only one or two that we would want to actually use. Others,
right. I think you, or in the past, had said, like, if you were asked how many songs are truly gospel-centered and correct theology out of, you name it, band out there, and I think you gave a number like 1 out of 5, or like 1 out of 6, maybe.
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on the group. I mean, there's with a group like Bethel, there's very few probably that we would use, but I think it does vary as far as that goes. But if I felt as though there were a lot of people who are seeing a band, like, so say it's Bethel, okay, and the name comes up, and we do the songwriter, whoever wrote, so it's not, we don't show Bethel Music or Elevation or Hillsong. It's this was the writer, and it's leading people to go and listen to the preaching. That would be concerning, I think. So I think that there is something, I think, that we should be careful there.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that these three churches are movements built off of music, if you will, are not equal. Like they're very different even among themselves. There's some similarities, but like if you were to ask me personally, I feel different about Hillsong than I do Bethel. Right. And I feel different about Elevation than I do both of those churches. Yeah. Would I endorse the teaching of any of those preachers? No. But if you look at their statements of faith, There's elements of there. Well, they really have orthodox statements of faith. It's the philosophy of ministry that we disagree with.
Yeah.
But in one of those cases, particularly Bethel, that's the one I feel probably the worst about, to be honest, is the practices associated with their ministry. They have a school of supernatural ministry there. And they've been tied to all kinds of things, and people can do their own research on this, but like the grave soaking thing, the glory cloud, the gold dust, and they've had former members and staff members speak out against some of the practices and things there. So there's some really bizarre practices that have been associated with that church that I think I don't want to lump these together and everybody to think that all these things are created equal. I do feel differently about even these three churches, but they tend to get lumped together because their music's so prominent.
Right.
And all of them are generally, I think, Reformed Christians or generally conservative Christians would kind of disagree with their ministry philosophies. Yeah. And so based on that, you get a lot of these questions. Should we sing their songs if by virtue of using that, we're paying royalties to the ministries?
Well, yeah. I mean, what's it's CCLI. So when you use their music, they're getting royalties off that use. And that is something for churches to consider too, is are you supporting that ministry by using their music? Just by using it and then getting royalties. So that's another thing to consider in that. I mean, somebody like me could say something like, Steve's prepping himself.
Well, no, I think this is why this is a good conversation, because like I don't want to financially support those ministries. Yeah. But where do you draw these lines? And I think that's the larger conversation. So if we say we're going to restrict any association of support here, where do we draw that line in the church? Is it only at worship music? Or do we apply that across the board when we're doing special events? Should we buy anything at Target because of their LGBTQ views and the way they promote things that Christians historically have been against?
But the other side of that is that they're not necessarily claiming to be Christian either.
Right.
Target's not.
But I'm just saying the money's going there.
Right.
And so like where do those lines get drawn? And that's part of the that's why I think when you really start to peel back the layers, it's not as easy and clear cut as a conversation as some people make it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we could all become like the Mennonites. And
get in the bubble.
We just live in a day where you can't, you would never be able to buy anything from anywhere if you vetted every single organization and their beliefs and their practices and said, I wouldn't support that because this stands against my Christian values. That would be a very difficult thing to do. Now, I understand if you want to argue that clearly worship music may be in a different category. And if you want to argue that these are ministries that are, falsely, proclaiming the name of Christ, or there's whatever you want to attach to that as being wrong or false, then I think that's a part of the conversation as well. But I'm saying you can't just simply draw the line at the financial support, because why would you do it here and not over here?
Right.
Related to that, I think also is just what is the line when we are evaluating where the music comes from. So the songwriter, we've identified some, but there are many others, and even hymn writers, back in the day, how good was all of their theology and
and that's the thing about the hymnals. Even the hymnals, you're going to find some songs sometimes that aren't even theologically correct.
Right.
I'm laughing because I heard John MacArthur say one time, he was like, if it's true, it's true. So on one hand, he was saying you evaluate things by the truthfulness of the message and its adherence to the scriptures. And he said there have been real Christians who have written bad theological songs. Yeah. And there have been non-Christians who have written good theological songs. Yeah. And so it's true. I mean, the clock's a dead, what do they say about a broken clock is right twice a day.
Twice a day.
And so even, you may find elements of truth, but that's so it can be so deceptive though, because that's how the enemy works, right? He puts a little truth in there, and and then all of a sudden you're listening to this more, and it can be a kind of subtle entrance into, and I think that's the fear. And if our role as elders is to really protect our flock, we need to be, and we do this. We really have raised the level of discernment. This wouldn't even be a discussion like in some churches, I don't think, but the level of discernment has been raised, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Part of our protection of our flock is training them to think biblically about every aspect of their life.
Yeah. I mean, we could always sing the Psalms.
Yeah.
Sing the Psalms.
Yeah. So the Psalms were written by a murderous adulterer, right?
Right. Who was forgiven.
Amen. That's a joke, by the way. That's a joke.
But I mean, I know I said it before, but anytime a church thinks about even making changes like this or changes that could happen, they have to happen slowly. You can't make any changes drastically right away. You know what I'm saying? That's we know that from going through the membership process in our church. That taking time to do that correctly meant a lot to the congregation for us to be considerate of that. I've also seen churches that have made immediate changes, and to drop an immediate bomb on the whole church like that can be very destructive to the congregation. I've seen it firsthand where a church leader changed the name of the church overnight with nobody knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not whimsical about anything. And for that reason.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm telling you, they lost 3/4 of their congregation that day.
Yeah.
When everybody came in, and a lot of people drove past it because they didn't see the sign.
Yeah.
Because the sign was literally changed from one Sunday to the next. So
that's wild to me.
So I think anytime you make changes, even if you're going to change your music and really get in depth with making changes, it can't happen overnight. There has to be an allowance for growth into something new, I think.
Yeah. If you were to look at our song list from years ago to now, you would find that we have done probably less songs, that are more vague in the way that they describe things. We're trying to find songs that are specific. We're bringing in a lot of Sovereign Grace music is very good in the way that it's
theologically rich.
Yes. Yeah. All of that. So we have more songs like that. And so we've moved in that direction. And I think that it does need to be somewhat gradual. I think, as we.
Well, I've heard, heard earlier what it was like before you came here.
I was more talking about like how the church lacked a sense of identity in some ways. Like the worship was one thing and the preaching was another thing, and it didn't seem to fit together very well, based on what I'd gathered stylistically. Right. You have like a young band trying to rock out like Christian punk rock. Yeah. And it just was a different vibe, and it was a complete contrast. But the song choice wasn't, they weren't thinking about theology.
Yeah.
They were thinking about.
I think things like that though. I think things like that though happen through an attempt at contextualization, trying to fit to a community. And I always think about the video where I see the elderly gentleman in his suit and tie with the people behind him in their suits and ties trying to sing heavy metal.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? At a church, and you're just like, no, just stop. There's a certain amount of, I think a lot of that came from, like we said, contextualization or inappropriate contextualization. And then also at the same time, you get this, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's part of the church growth movement thing too, where a lot of that stuff comes from. And that's where we've seen, Vineyard, Bethel, all these large churches like that came from out in the West Coast. When you see that, a lot of it came from that. So I think that's part of it.
I think overall church growth happens together, right? This is one of the reasons I think this is such a cool format that we have with this podcast is to, allow our church members to know our hearts, things that we're thinking as leaders in the church. And it allows them to, I hadn't thought about that before. The vast majority of people probably aren't thinking about this stuff. And so by virtue of just having these conversations and putting them out there and allowing our church to understand, we're pretty serious, we're very serious, right, about how we honor God as a church family. And so let us continually be refined by him. Let's seek his guidance. Let's continue to be reformed by the word. And, we started with Luther and Semper Reformanda. It means always reforming, right? So the church is always going to be reforming if it's trying to be faithful to the scriptures by going back to the scriptures. What guides our decision-making in this?
Right.
What guides, the sort of foundation of our ministry as a whole. And if it's the word of God, then we're always going to be looking back to that, seeking to honor him, sing songs that highlight his character, his nature, his activity, the good things about him that are going to point us to Christ and truly please him. And I think that's the process of having these kind of conversations. It gives people a window into that. And I just think it's really helpful. Instead of just saying, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to do this anymore. Unless it's just a clear, but I hope that we've been able to demonstrate in this conversation it's not as simple as some people want to make it,
right?
Because where do you draw these lines? And that's a challenging conversation to have.
I feel like this matter is somewhat a matter of conscience too, which is really probably the thing that gives me the most pause. There's a lot of arguments out there, about those ministries and supporting them. And, there's things I think that are somewhat minor. Maybe, there's certain things that we can look at. It might be a little bit nitpicky and different things like that. But I think that if there are Christians in our congregation whose conscience is bothered by singing those songs, then I think that's what would bother me the most. Like if they're like, is it wrong to sing this song? And, or is it, if their conscience is bothered by it, then I think it's important for us to
take it seriously.
Yeah.
To have the conversations for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get everything out you wanted to say over there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, we don't want people to be uncomfortable. I have other notes and things like that I was just trying to think through. In the one thing I think that these ministries, we can look at them and say, well, they don't have this right or that right. But I think that good can even come from those elevation. And, I think people were saved in those ministries. And, while they may not be initially as discerning as we would hope that God would grow them through the Holy Spirit. But I think that those ministries have done good in ways and have helped people. And I think of Philippians 1 when Paul said, people are preaching Christ for the wrong reasons and different things like that. And he says, what? But even though it might be out of selfish ambition, Christ is being proclaimed. And in that I rejoice. And so I think that with this particular issue, thinking about those ministries, being careful about them, but at the same time, I don't know that we want to say, okay, everything they do is terrible either.
Yeah.
I was just so I read through each one of their statements of faith, and there's things I would disagree with, but they would kind of be more because of the charismatic leanings that some of those churches have. But that's one of those second tier, third tier issues. And I just want to be cautious about, I would want to be cautious about bringing kind of cancel culture into the church on matters of disagreement that are not as clear. Like I said, I feel different about each one of those ministries.
Right.
But there's a hesitancy to just make a blanket statement that would completely cancel out. Although the problem is in my heart, I know I wouldn't tell anybody. I wouldn't recommend those churches to anybody.
Right.
And I think that's why this is a hard issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really difficult when you look at those churches and they're like moving to one of those areas and you say, no, don't go there. You know what I'm saying? No, I don't recommend you go to that church. Yeah. So I know I think about this from the place where I've come from, and knowing the ministry that Nikki and I came from previous to here, which we didn't even know until we were asked to be on the board, which the board didn't even really matter because the pastor did whatever he wanted anyways. But then I found out that they were essentially attached to a mega church. And that's where they were getting all their counsel from. And that's why when I realized some of the things that they were bringing into the church, and I realized the music that they were using, when I really started getting in depth, and I think that's why I was so concerned and made sure, like Steve can tell you, I interviewed him before.
Oh yeah.
We met for coffee and I basically interviewed him before I brought my family and even stepped foot in the church, because I wanted to make sure that what was being preached was gospel, was from the Bible, was biblical. And the music matters just as much as what's being preached from the pulpit, because a lot of times the songs that are being sung are what is leaving the doors in their heads. You know, they're humming those songs. They're singing those songs themselves in their cars on their way home from church. So it is important, just as important, for it to be biblical. So for me, if the song itself is biblical, I'm satisfied. Now, when it comes to...
It's the second and third order effects.
Second and third order
that's
effects.
What I said. That's where it comes down to.
That bother me because I know how I was. Where that's a really cool song. We, look up on iTunes. And if like 1 out of 5 songs is the only correct theology in that whole band, and that person is sitting there slamming that stuff into their heads with their headphones on at their desk at work, or, you know what I'm saying, or at home or whatever, while they're washing dishes, what kind of theology are they pumping into themselves? And I think as shepherds of the flock, as people who are supposed to be protecting the flock, putting up those gates, those fences to protect the flock, I think that's where I have my issue with songs from those ministries. So
yeah, because songs are very impactful, and they can really drive home good or bad things. So yeah, I think that's important. And so you mentioned just the importance of guarding the flock. And I think, we need to guard the flock. So when you think about a particular song, I think there's maybe 2 sides of the coin. It's like, okay, here's a really good song that could be edifying to people, encouraging and helpful in ways, God honoring, but it's from a movement where we wouldn't want people probably to go listen to read the books, and
right.
So yeah, it's a bit of a dilemma, I think. But
yeah, I mean, I would love to know what our listeners think. This is a conversation that we're having. This is something we'll continue to refine at our church and think about. But I think I'd like to know, do people in our congregation? I don't think so. I mean, I know our members we're very active in shepherding our flock, and I generally have a good sense of where people are and, their level of discernment. And so I wonder, I mean, just yesterday I was engaged in conversation, like somebody was reading something like, hey, this seems off to me. What do you think about this?
Yeah.
I would hope that most people would do that if something seems off. And, yeah, just again, raising the discernment level and being adamant and insistent on, guarding that.
Well, and I think what we've already kind of discussed is as the congregation becomes more biblically attuned, they are becoming more discerning, and you are going to get more questions about songs that are being sung, or maybe even something you say during a sermon. Yeah, and that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I get questions, and I entertain that. Matter of fact, I wish we had more time. I know Tim Keller used to hang out after church, and if people had questions about the sermon, they would just ask right then, and he would kind of make it a little thing for like 10, 15 minutes. I always thought that was kind of cool. I never want to, we never want to create an environment where people aren't free to ask like real questions that they have. So I think it's kind of cool and important.
I mean, so definitely leave questions down below.
Yeah. And I wonder if, like, I don't know how many other pastors, or I got a lot of pastor friends that tune in from time to time. I wonder what other people have thought about this. So I'd love to see some things in the comments. Like, how do you think about this? What do
Right.
what is your stance on this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would be good to know.
Absolutely. Let us know. Good conversation.
Do we
guys.
separate the art from the artist?
There it is.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, gentlemen. Are all hearts clear?
I don't know about that.
I plan on continuing to consider and seek the Lord's guidance in this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially for us three and the rest of the elders of Water's Edge Church to think about this one and really consider how we should handle issues like this. So, all right, gentlemen, is that all you guys have?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Well, if you guys have not done so yet, make sure you like and subscribe and click that bell so you know when we release new material. Also, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, make sure you leave us a review so we know how we're doing. We want to know. Leave us that review. And if that is it, gentlemen, we love you all and God bless.
God bless.
I mean.